Welcome to episode 147 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. Today I'm speaking with Jessica Stone. She's a novelist, screenwriter, and storyteller who will soon turn 50. Jessica has lived a remarkable life. She became a mother at a very young age and spent many years working in survival mode. She endured domestic abuse, a devastating health crisis, and a near-death experience that reshaped the way she viewed her identity, her purpose, and the future she wanted to create. Her experiences would eventually lead her to faith, healing, and reconciliation, as well as a renewed calling to share stories that bring hope to others. Here are some key takeaways from our conversation. First, Jessica's near-death experience forced her to rethink what truly mattered and inspired her to finally pursue writing. Second, she grew up in a multicultural environment overseas and experienced deep identity struggles when returning to the United States. Third, writing fiction became a way for Jessica to process her past while offering readers stories that acknowledge pain but also point to hope. Fourth, she believes every person has a calling and gifts that are meant to be used rather than setting them aside for practical demands of life. Finally, Jessica's relationship with her daughter's father came full circle, leading the two of them to marry many years after their daughter was born. Jessica currently writes Christian fiction, along with stories that highlight themes such as forgiveness, identity, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. To tell us more about her incredible story, please welcome Jessica Stone to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Jessica. I really appreciate the time. I understand you're still in your youth, being months away from turning 50, but I appreciate you coming onto the show because you've had a lot of real-life experiences that my audience will certainly appreciate and talk about. I understand it's been a challenge for you this year.
It has been, and Greg, thank you so much for having me. I am 49, but I feel like it's so odd. Physically, I feel like I'm going on 100 most days. Mentally, emotionally, I still go to my 27-year-old daughter for life advice because I feel like she's way more mature than I am. And she actually is. I think she was born as a 60-year-old woman. She hates technology. She would much rather take pen to paper, and she mails letters all the time. I asked her the other day if someone was going to post something, and she thought I meant mail it in the mail. And I was like, no, post on social media. But yes, I have had an interesting past several years, actually, health-wise, which really led me to all sorts of amazing things that I never thought it would lead me to, but also helped me to face the fact that I am not only not getting any younger, but really have a lot that, not to sound morbid, but I think, what do I want my eulogy and my obituary to say? And I am just diving in with both feet into all sorts of things that my younger self always wanted to do and just kept putting off.
I understand you had a near-death experience that woke you up and changed the way you thought about life. Tell us.
Very much. So to start, I was diagnosed in my mid-20s with type 1 diabetes, which is not a normal thing to be diagnosed at that stage. But your body being under stress can throw you into it. That's just the way bodies react sometimes. And I was actually in an abusive marriage when I was in my 20s. And my body's reaction to that was to give me type 1 diabetes. So everything that I deal with health-wise always has that extra complication because of this. And I was in my, 13 years ago, so in my mid-30s, and had just gotten married and had gone from being a single mom working 3 jobs for 10 years to being in a situation where I didn't have to work. And so I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get to be like the volunteer at the school and the car pickup mom and all these things I'm so excited about. And about 3 months after our honeymoon, I developed a cough, and it was Labor Day weekend. And we had all sorts of plans for Labor Day weekend. So cough wasn't going to get me down. So I just pushed through, and a couple weeks later, still had the cough, had a temperature that was exceeding 102 degrees. Actually ended up going between 102 and 107 for the next many months, and just could not get rid of whatever this was. And getting a lot of other symptoms and the night sweats and the shaking all the time and unable to keep food down, and lost a ton of weight that I did not have to spare. And I went to my doctor, who said, "You have pneumonia," and gave me a round of medication. A couple weeks later, that had not been enough. So I went back and she said, "You need to go to the emergency room." They wanted to admit me. And I said, "I don't have time to be admitted. The holidays are coming." It was literally like November of 2011. And this is my first big set of holidays with my new family, and I don't have time for this. So I refused the admission, went home. And by Christmas, I just knew that when I went back to the doctor, that whatever it was going to be something deadly. I knew because of how terrible I felt. So everyone came for Christmas, and thankfully I avoided them for the most part. I just stayed in bed the whole time. And January came, and I just didn't want to get bad news. And so I kept putting it off. And one thing about me is I am a procrastinator. I say it's because I work best under pressure. In this case, this did not serve me well. February came. So at this point, I had been sick since the beginning of September. It was the week of Valentine's Day. And my daughter, who was 12 or 13 at the time, comes home from school and finds me on the verge of unconscious, laying on the living room floor. So she calls 911. And I remember this. She always reminds me just how very stubborn and stupid I can be. I said, if I'm going to the hospital, I know good and they're not going to let me shower anytime soon. And because I had such a bad fever for so long, and I was constantly hot and cold sweats and all of this, like I would wake up in the bed, like with the bed just completely soaked. It was awful. I said, will you help me take a shower before they get here? She's, Mother, this is not important. But to me, it really was. So she literally hosed me off in the shower, wrapped me up in a blanket. And long story, that has already been long, but I'll try to wrap it up. I ended up being diagnosed with tuberculosis, which had no idea where that had come from. The two doctors that were working with me said it was the worst case they'd ever seen. My entire left lung was eaten away. Half of my right lung was eaten away. Yeah. I had collapsed lungs, which had to be treated surgically twice. And I was in the hospital for a long time, and I ended up in a coma. And they actually told my family to start making arrangements for my death because they did not expect at all that I would survive this. My organs had shut down. I was on dialysis. And of course, let's throw type 1 diabetes into the mix. All of these things were happening. And actually, there's more to the story that is on my website, which I'll share that later because it's a long and crazy story. But I ended up pulling through, and no one expected it. But when I did, I thought my daughter, who's a teenager now, would have never known me in any other sense than as a mother, because I'd been, as I said, a single mom for a really long time. And all she saw was this harried person who, for all she knew, had no dreams, had no other dreams other than just getting through the day. And that was how I'd been living for so long in this survival mode. And so a story came to mind of a woman who, strangely enough, is actually in the story. The daughter is the age my daughter is now. She's 27. And she has been keeping a secret from her mother. And we all know how that goes. I don't know about you, but I can tell you I kept lots of secrets from my mother that were not really as secret as I thought they were. But she's been keeping a secret from her mother. And they've been very close. I always say they had a Gilmore Girls-esque relationship, which is very much how my daughter and I relate to each other. But she loses her mother unexpectedly before they can reconcile. And as I was thinking about this story when I was inspired, obviously, by what I'd gone through. But as I was thinking about it, I thought my daughter would have just never known anything about who I am other than a mother as a woman, because there was just no way for me to have passed that along. So in the book, the mother has kept journals, and the daughter finds her journals and realizes there's all of these things about her mother that she just never knew. But
the daughter found the journals after the mom had died.
So the daughter finds the journals as she's clearing out her mother's house, which is in Wisconsin. So they had lived in Wisconsin. The daughter has actually started with a music career in Nashville, behind the scenes, not as an on-stage person, but her lifelong dream had been to move to Nashville to pursue a career in music. And her mother was always super supportive of it. And a lot of this really does mirror my daughter. As a young girl said, I'm going to move to Paris to be a fashion designer when I graduate high school. And a month after she graduated, she moved to Paris, and she's been there for 10 years now. It was very much inspired by real life. But I also, thinking about and preparing for this conversation, I realized that I'm a little ashamed to say I don't like deep thinking about my own life. Like I tend to go down the rabbit hole and I'm very hard on myself about things I've done, decisions I've made, and all of the things that I regret. And I think that this story and the rest of this series, in particular, even more than some of the more lighthearted things that I write, are really the way that I've processed a lot of my past decisions and a lot of the things that I say regrets. And I use that word very carefully because I have really started to realize that those things that we regret most will very often be the only way that we end up with the biggest blessings that we just never imagined. Regret, but not regret.
I understand. I love your website because it's got a tagline, Hope Remains. What's the story behind that?
I have struggled most of my life with depression, and to the point that I have considered and attempted ending my life on a few different occasions. And so I always say it's really wacky that I decided that was my tagline, because it is really the only thing that I have to hold on to. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what hope means and where it comes from when you don't seem to have any reason to keep hoping. And I chose that almost as a reminder to myself and as something I'm just going to claim and remind myself to hold on to it, because it doesn't come naturally for me. So I on my homepage, I have crisis, abuse, and all these other things that I've dealt with in my life, but reminding myself of how God has come through in so many ways that it's so easy to forget. And even when I forget, I see other people saying, this was what I was dealing with, and this is how God worked it out for my good. And I'm like, I don't see that as clearly as I wish I did in my life. But I can look back at the fact that I was literally on my deathbed, literally having an out-of-body experience, watching my body from below, watching angels and demons fighting over my body, which is the story I alluded to earlier, which is on my website. And realizing that no matter what, if that is the only thing I ever have to see clearly and to really hold on to, that's a pretty big thing. I was allowed to survive that, and I was allowed to turn myself around because I was doing things and living in a way that people who knew me then and now hear you write Christian fiction are like, whoa, where did that come from? Because that's not the Jessica I knew, but I'm not the same person.
When did you come to faith?
So I was raised in a Christian household. I grew up in church. The daughter, the main character in my novel, the same way. It was never really personal. And I always think of it like, it's so easy to say, I want you to be my savior, but I don't want you to be the Lord of my life. It's not the same thing. And that was really, so sorry, I'm going to try not to cry. That was really how I lived for a long time. So I'm going to share something that I had not previously shared with you. And I don't speak about it on my website, but I have shared it in posts on social media. So it's not a big secret, but I grew up saying, I'm saving myself for marriage. This is what we do. This is who I am. This is who I want to be. And at 18 years old, I ended up losing my virginity to a rapist.
Ooh.
And it spun me in a direction that I would have never in a million years thought that I would go down the road that I went down. And it was really hard for me. So it wasn't that I didn't believe in God. I was just so angry, and I was shocked that something that I was trying to save because I thought that it was what he wanted me to do, and he allowed me to lose it this way. So I had a lot of years that I say I wish I could take back. However, it's where my daughter came from. And I also know that there was a 1 in a million chance that the father of my child now, all these years later, we actually got married 7 years ago. What if? Never imagined. When you talk about God redeeming something. So my relationship with God has not been steady, but it's always been there in the sense that I believed in him. I was trying really hard to believe that he cared about me and had something good for me. I remember when I was a couple of years after I was raped, I had a very intense encounter. I remember like literally being on my knees, on my face, on the floor, just crying and sobbing and like knowing that he was there and he cared about me and he was still going to take care of me. But I'm one of those, I'm a fixer kind of person, and I have a bit of a control issue, which again is mirrored in the main character in my story, who really thinks if I do all of the right things, then I can make this work. I can fix this. And the thing I've very recently come to realize with that is that the flip side of that is when things go wrong, you just internalize it and it's always going to be your fault because you didn't do things right enough. So therefore, the result and the consequences are going to be completely something that is not good and is completely on you, or in this case, on me, rather than being able to just give up the sense of everything good that happens is because I didn't, and so everything bad that happens is because I didn't do something right. And I still struggle with that. But writing a character who deals with that, I was like, he born me. Oh, so you're the daughter in this book. And I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be the mother, the gracious, grace-filled, wrote these beautiful journals and trusted God with everything. They're like, no, you're the daughter. You're the control freak. You're the one who is really like struggling to believe that God has something good for you.
I think unbelief is something a lot of Christians struggle with from time to time. In fact, one of my favorite Bible stories is Jesus encountering a man who has a sick child. And the man tells Jesus, if you can, would you heal him? And Jesus goes, if. Jesus could do it immediately. And the man says, I believe, help me with my unbelief. Because I think that's something that so many things happen to us and the people we love and around us in the world that we just don't believe that God is there and in control. So we need help with our unbelief. And it sounds like you realized that and found it. And now you're teaching other people to be more sensitive to that and to actually believe. You have a whole series of books that you've developed now, and one is out and a whole bunch are waiting for publication.
Yes. I wrote this first story, and I had a very interesting journey to publication because I wrote the book. I was also working as an editor for a publishing house at the time. So I did my first round of edits on it, and I sent it to one agent. And I just, for some reason in my head, I thought, this is all I have to do. I did a lot of research. I found the one I wanted. I'm like, oh, I'm going to hire you. And I sent it out. And a couple of weeks later, a good friend of mine who has been writing books and movies and all sorts of things since she started young, she knew she wanted to do this young and started at 20. And she said, I had to pitch like 200 agents before I found one. And I was like, you mean I have to do this again? So I literally pulled out my laptop and started looking up some others, just thinking, I guess I'll have a backup plan. And heard back from that first agent pretty much right away. Within 3 weeks of my initial email to her, she'd written me back and said that she wanted to move forward.
That's a good thing.
Landed an agent. She is really incredible. She writes nonfiction. So that's been a little bit of an interesting thing for me, is that her mind works in the way of nonfiction. But I learned so much from her, and we got this first book out And she said, and she'd been saying the whole time, would you write romance? Because while there is a central married couple in the story, it's not a romance. And she said, would you write romance? And I said, oh, like my history, my personal history, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So I kept saying no. And after probably a good almost 2 years of her asking, I ended up in a meeting with an editor from an incredible publishing house. And we were chatting and I said, the only way that, my agent keeps asking me to do this. I said, the only way I would is I'm a little snarky, a little sarcastic. I said, I could do a rom-com, not just a straight romance. And so I started to develop this idea and it actually turned into my favorite story that I've written. It is a rom-com and I met with several publishers just about a month ago. One of them is a big 5 publisher and all 4 of them are interested in it. So I will find something out this month, hopefully. But I should be.
Is that your book, Retirement Rendezvous?
No. Okay. So Retirement Rendezvous is just a little short story. I wanted to put something as a freebie on my website that kind of alludes to the fact that all of my books won't make you cry, because the series from Thornbush and Juniper Story, there are some heavy emotional scenes throughout each of these stories. So I just wrote something a little lighthearted. But so this one I said, I will write a rom-com, but it will not be fluffy. And I keep saying this is a very non-fluffy story. And I don't know why I feel the need. There's nothing wrong with a fluffy story. And my agent kept saying, in the times that we're living in right now, people don't want to be bogged down with more emotional, sad stories. Write something that'll make them laugh.
That's why the Hallmark Channel exists, right? They have one plot in 20,000 movies.
Exactly. So I said, I don't want to write that sort of thing. Like, I want to write something that's meaningful. And I actually wrote this story. I started it in 2022, I think, finished the first version in 2023. And it went through a couple of changes after that. But the main character is blind. The main male character is blind. He is a travel vlogger. So he writes stories based on his experience traveling as a blind man, but he's also a Black man. And he can't tell too much of it, but he has decided to set an episode of his travel show on an island that it turns out was where the only beach accessible to Black people in Florida, like on the East Coast at all, but it is in Florida during times of segregation. So he's there and he is featuring this island, which has this beach. And when I picked the island, I didn't know this. When he picked the island, he only just knew a little bit. But I have realized that pitching this story right now, it's an appropriate time to be pitching a story like this because it's the history of this island, it's the history of our country, and it's not wanting to sweep things under the rug and forget about them. I just really love the story. So even though it's full of lots of witty lines and quippy lines and very adorable meet cute, and he meets a baker who has body dysmorphia, so you can just imagine how she's working around all of these sweets and is struggling with not taste testing everything. But it's just a really cute story, but addresses in a lighthearted manner some things that are serious and timely. So that's my story that I finished. And then from there, it's gone into, if she's going to ask for rom-coms, then I'll do a couple. So I actually have 2 more I'm working on as well.
Wonderful. Your parents are of mixed races, aren't they?
They are.
Okay.
And that
you can come to it from a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. That was an interesting thing for me. My dad was in the Navy, so I actually spent most of my childhood living in Greece and went to an international school, and racism was the farthest thing from my mind living where I lived. And we moved back to the States and I was like literally slapped in the face with it. I was treated very poorly from the handful of Black kids that went to my school because they all assumed I thought I was better than them because I was half white. And I was treated very poorly by the white kids because I was half Black. Things that would horrify you if I told you were things that were happening to me. And I was like, oh, I want to go back to Europe. Did not like living in the States at all. Growing up that way and then learning to accept myself, which was a process in itself as a Navy kid. Yes, I did spend several years in the same house in Greece. But once we moved back, we moved enough times that I went to 12 schools in 13 years.
Wow. That's hard to make friends in that kind of environment.
And I didn't. That's when I fell in love with books and with reading, because these were my friends I could take with me.
That's right.
And I always had my nose in a book. I always had a book hidden in my textbooks. I was walking home from school reading. I can't believe I didn't get run over. But that was when I decided that I wanted to write books.
Okay.
And it was something that I tried. I actually worked as a journalist in my 20s and decided I was going to try my first it was a romance actually when I was in my 20s, and it was terrible. And I set it to the side, and I think my fear was, this is my one thing I really want to do. And if I'm not good at this, then what do I have left? So I just put it off and put it off and put it off. And
so you didn't start writing. You went to occupational therapy because you were afraid you might not be good enough as a writer?
So actually, in a very roundabout way, I was in property management for a long time. So I mentioned earlier, I was in an abusive marriage. So when I left that, to me, the thing that would make it a little bit easier to leave would be if I had an apartment already like that I could go to. So I started working in property management right before I knew I was going to be leaving him, so that I would have an apartment to stay in. And I did that on and off for 12 years. And when I had, as I said, I'd gotten married to someone in 2011, not my current husband. I'm actually finally married for life, but as I said, to my daughter's father. But I married someone else that I honestly thought I was head over heels. Like this was exactly who I wanted to be with. People couldn't understand it from the outside. He was 20 years older than me. He was also very well off. So a lot of people thought, oh, she's just marrying him for the money. But I cannot tell you like how my heart would speed up in a dangerous way when I knew I was going to see this man. Like I was always so excited to spend time with him. And it wasn't just the lifestyle. It was really what I thought I wanted. That being said, I looked at it afterwards and I'm like, was the devil in my head? What made me think that was a good idea? We didn't have anything in common other than the fact that we both liked men. And I did not know that at the time.
Oh,
so while I had just married him when I got sick, and I was in the hospital, of course, for a long time, and then recovering for a long time from that. But I had at least had the opportunity to retire from working at that stage. So I wasn't worried about going back to work. But that was when I decided I would start writing this book. Well, it took me so long. It took me 2 years to like fully recover. I ended up having 4 long surgeries. As I said, I was in the hospital and comatose for a long time. I couldn't walk for ages. That was a whole, recovering from that was more traumatic, I think, than being in the coma. Honestly, it was awful and it was so long, but I had such great therapy teams helping me with everything that I decided I was going to go back to school for occupational therapy, because I'd also realized, of course, during that time, what was really going on with my then husband, and knew that I was going to have to end the marriage. And so we had come to the decision that kind of he would live his life and I would go to school and I would live mine, and he would support Kaylee, my daughter, moving to Paris and pay for her schooling, and that we would separate when that time came. I was looking for a career because I knew I was going to have to go back to supporting myself, but I wanted to be something I wanted to do. So I decided I would go to school for occupational therapy and get into healthcare. And the timing was just as it was. My daughter and I graduated within a few months of each other. She moved to Paris. I graduated a few months later and was working in occupational therapy. And then COVID hit. And for someone who's missing part of a lung, COVID was not an environment I needed to be subjecting myself to. That was when I ended up deciding to finish this book that I started all those years earlier. But the funny thing about that is we were talking about regrets. And I will say I deeply regretted the fact that the way that my daughter's father and I ended up coming back together was she wanted to meet him. She'd never met him. So she said, I want to meet him before I move out of the country because that'll be easier than trying to arrange something after. within a month of her graduating high school, she was going to be moving. So we tracked him down and we met him for lunch. And my then husband and I had already decided we were not going to continue our marriage after this. And I saw him and there was a spark, the same spark that had been around 18 years before. And I said, this is not about us seeing each other. This is about him and my daughter meeting. And so I pushed it off for a few months, but we decided that we were going to give it another try. And I said for a long time after that, for several years, I told him this, which sounds harsh, but my biggest regret was I had only been a mother because I'd become a mother young. And so I'd only been a mother from age 20 to, at this point, 30, 39, almost 40. And everything I'd done had been in the hopes of doing the best thing for my daughter, for her future. And I had been planning that when I ended the bad marriage number 2, that I was finally going to have a chance to figure out who I was. Like, when all of your life is revolving around someone else, even if it's someone that you want your life to be revolving around, that really limits how you can express yourself and how you can just search yourself for who you are and who you want to be. And instead, I sent my daughter off to Paris, and within a couple of months had gotten into a relationship with her father again. And I was like, I did not give myself the space or the time to figure out who I was and what I wanted. And so I really carried that as a deep regret for several years, not because I wasn't happy with him, not because he wasn't wonderful, but I was like, this was my chance. This was finally my chance. I had the means to do what I wanted to do, and I did not do that. And when COVID hit, we ended up, and with me finally having time to write this book and everything, I can look back at it now and think what I saw as another big misstep on my part to not give myself that time and space of not taking my chance to explore myself. Really, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have this book out. I wouldn't be in talks with such amazing publishers about my next round of stories. And I have even written a screenplay, which I just pitched the idea to a director and said, if you want to take this idea and run with it, be my guest. And she's, oh no, you should write the scripts for it. We'll actually make it into a movie. So none of these things would have happened. But even less than professionally and finally getting a chance to chase my dreams, like I would not, even after everything I went through with my health, like I still feel like I was having such a hard time fighting the fact that it was all on me to make the right decisions. And like, I could look back on all these things that I wished I'd done differently in my life and take all of the blame for why I wasn't successful, why I had so many health issues, why it felt like I always needed someone else to be a part of my life and I couldn't just be on my own. But I look at that now and think I can see where God was just woven throughout my story this entire time in a way that I couldn't see it at the time.
That's a neat story. I really like that. Absolutely. So now you're fully supporting yourself through writing.
So now I am able to write full time, and my husband is very supportive of us. But what's been interesting is he works in an industry where the parent company for who he's working for, they're based in Paris. And so they actually would like to spend more time there. So we've decided that we're going to get an apartment there and I'll be able to spend springs and falls over there writing, and I'll be near my daughter and near any future grandchildren that I might have, although that's not anything that's imminent. It really has given us the opportunity to spend more time there and spend a lot of time with her because of his company being based.
That's another God thing. My goodness. Yes. So I've not interviewed anybody who's written movie scripts before. Was that challenging?
When she said, you can write the script, can you do it in 2 weeks? That was the challenging part. I said, as long as if I don't bleed for the next 2 weeks, sure. So that was actually how that went down. But what was interesting, and again, it's one of those things that one day I'll look back and see God's hand in it, but we had it financed for the most part. And when the tariffs started to have everyone concerned about what was going to happen, he owns restaurants. And he said, I'm afraid of what the tariffs are going to do to my business. He backed his commitment way back, like
Okay.
to a quarter of what it was. And so we are now working more on finding the funding that we'll need for it. But so that was where my 2-week time limit had come in, because this was like in May and she wanted to start shooting in July. Like it was happening quickly. And so having the opportunity to not shoot it over the summer, which I will never not regret, not shooting a movie in Atlanta in July, which was what the plan would have been, not at that phase of my life where I enjoy hot weather. But I mentioned it to my agent saying, do I need to loop you in on this? Does this need your signature on anything? And she said, only if you make it into a manuscript as well. And I said, I'm not doing that. And she said, once she heard the story, she says, I would really like you to make that into a manuscript. And I was like, no, not doing that. And a couple months later, I caved and I told her that I had started working on it. So I really like the fact that I got the extra time to do the manuscript version, because it has given a way for me to strengthen the script itself. But script writing it's hard for me because I want to explain and this is the gesture that an actor is making. And they're like, we don't want to be told what to do. Just to tell us how to stay. In a way, it's easier, but I also really liked that the story itself was outlined because it made the manuscript writing a lot easier. I'm a seat of the pants kind of story writer. I never really have a good outline going. I think I do. I try to, but I veer off course a lot. I listen to the voices in my head telling me what they want to do instead of sticking to the script.
Many people write a manuscript and turn it into a screenplay because people like to watch the movies and then read the book.
Yes.
So
I'm really hoping that I end up with both from this.
That's awesome. Do you have any advice for people over 50 who might be struggling with what to do to get their life more meaning and purpose? It seems like you have been in those stages where you have felt your life doesn't have meaning and purpose, and all of a sudden you've got more meaning and purpose and you know what to do with.
So I have, as I said, I've had some health challenges, and I think that has reworked my idea about what's important in life. I have a very hard time thinking that we were created to be on this planet to sit in a cubicle.
Yes.
And to spend so much time not only at work, but thinking about work when we're not at work. And I don't think this is how our bodies were designed. I don't think this is how our spirits were designed. And this is not a think, like an opinion, like this is not how we were designed. But we were all given gifts. And I think that there's always a way to contribute to society while using your gifts. And I do think that for me, I look back on years in property management, which I'm not a numbers person, couldn't care. I was a property manager. When I finally ended it, I reached this stage where I just stared at spreadsheets and numbers and had reports about how much we were paying for things and how much we were bringing in all day. And that wasn't what I liked about that job. I loved the people. I loved meeting the people. I was always swayed by a sob story. It was not good for me. I would literally pull money from my own wallet to help people to pay their bill. And I've realized that there are ways to be contributing members of society while also leaning into your gifts. But the things that you enjoy most about a day job are really what your gifts are.
Should be.
Or should be. Like it's a miserable existence to spend so much time at something that you just hate all of it.
Exactly.
And I do understand there are jobs that someone has to do them. And people can say like, no one enjoys mopping a floor, cleaning a toilet, but at the same time, you can still use your gifts no matter what you're doing.
I am a firm believer that God who gave you the gifts will open the door for you to use them.
Exactly.
And so a lot of people get talked out of using their gifts that they've known in their heart that this is what they want to do. They get excited about it, but well-meaning friends and family members tell them, no, you've got to be more practical. You've got your family to worry about. You've got your kids or your spouse, etc. And so they push this desire that's still burning in them, way deeply in them, push it aside. And once you turn 50, it's a great opportunity for you to say, all right, heck with it. I'm going to pursue this thing because I feel called to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. And people's lives, no one is ever in the same stage at 50 as anybody else necessarily. For me, because I had my daughter so young, it's been almost 10 years since she went off to college. So I've been an empty nester for a long time. And that being said, she still has, when I say we talk 16, 18 times a day, I'm not exaggerating. She calls to tell me what she had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But
beauty of the internet, for goodness sakes. You couldn't
oh
do
my
that if you
goodness,
had to put
yeah.
long distance.
When we lived in Greece, my mother did not get to talk to her mother nearly as often. But I'm in a stage now where, speaking of my mother, she's recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So I am about to also I'm not a caregiver yet, but we are getting to that phase. And I think the main thing is to just not lose that interest in, there's a whole big world out there. And it shocks me when I meet someone who has never been on a plane or never traveled outside of
their
city or their county. Exactly. And one of the things that I always wanted to really lean into was just offering exposure to people who just didn't ever think that they could want something like that for themselves. Each of the stories like really speaks into something that is something that I care about on a deep heart level. There's one of the stories focuses on a young woman who was raised in the foster care system. Mm-hmm. That is just something that's very important to me. Not only foster care, but she didn't have a home, so she was unhoused for a while. And it addresses that. It addresses each of these characters are a piece of me and something that I care about. For each of the stories, there is a nonprofit that's associated with each of them that will get a portion of the proceeds. And then for the story that I mentioned earlier, the rom-com, where the male protagonist is a blind man, I put it in my proposal. It's very important to me that this book is available in Braille when the time comes, because I think that a lot of people see fiction itself as an escape from reality and fluff. But for me, it was not only a way for me to process my feelings about myself and things I've been through and experiences I've had, but also to speak to, it's a responsibility, especially as a Christian author, to put things out that not only glorify God, but help people to see something, an experience or a person or a character that they might not necessarily seek out for themselves. Mm-hmm. If you have no experience with interacting with someone who is of a different race than you, or someone who has been in foster care, or I have a character who was trafficked as a child. If these are not things that you encounter in your day-to-day, maybe reading in fiction just opens your eyes a little bit to the fact that these are based on real issues.
Exactly. How can people connect with you if they would like to learn more about you or to follow you as you start producing these books and movies and all the other good stuff?
Yes. So my website is jessicastonestories.com. And all of my social media handles are Jessica Stone Storyteller. So you can find me pretty much anywhere.
Which social media channels are you actively in?
I have Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Threads, and I have a blog that is on my website. So I link to a lot of different things.
Super. Which books are available right now?
So right now you can get Beauty and the Bittersweet, which if we're on camera when you show, this is the cover of that one. And there are 2 prequels that are available. They're actually free on my website. They have before been like 99 cents, but they're free right now. And you'll be looking for, I'm not even allowed, can't even really say titles for upcoming things because the titles often change. This was not the title of this one. This was not even the cover I had in mind, but the publisher, they sometimes have their own thoughts on this. But if you look for my name, I'm on Amazon as well. I've got an author page there, and you'll be notified. If you follow me there, you'll be notified when the next book comes out. I'm aiming to have an audiobook version of this one out by the spring, and the sequel to it out next year as well.
Wonderful.
But there will be, my social media, my website will have all of the updates as soon as I'm allowed to give them.
Mm-hmm. Lots of things to look forward to. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing your story with me today. I really appreciate it. You've been through a lot, but you've turned your pain into purpose, and you are enriching the lives of other people through your stories. And we want people to tell their stories because that's how we relate with one another. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Greg.
What gives Jessica Stone meaning and purpose at this stage of her life is the opportunity to live authentically and to create stories that bring hope to others who are struggling. For many years, Jessica carried regrets about the choices she made earlier in life and the hardships she endured. But today she sees how those experiences have been redeemed. Not only did she survive a life-threatening illness, but she also found reconciliation with her daughter's father. After nearly 2 decades apart, the two of them married, which is a blessing that Jessica said she would never have predicted. Now, as she approaches 50, Jessica is embracing a season of renewed identity. She is writing full-time, creating books and screenplays designed to help people feel seen and understood. She is also looking forward to spending more time with her daughter, who lives in Paris, where Jessica and her husband will divide their time in the future. For Jessica, purpose is found in leaning into the gifts God has given her, telling stories that speak to real struggles and reminding others that hope still remains even in the darkest moments. Her book, Beauty and the Bittersweet, is available on Amazon and in other bookstores. She will release a sequel sometime in 2026. However, people can subscribe to her email list and get immediate access to 2 prequels, as well as another book titled Retirement Rendezvous, by visiting her website at www.jessicastonestories.com. Jessica's life is a testament to the impact of restoration and the belief that someone's story is never really finished, no matter how late in the journey it may seem. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which is available at www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thank you for listening, and if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.